June 19, 1944, 35, 0 feet above the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell squinted through the cockpit glass of his F-6F Hellcat, sweat beading on his brow despite the high-altitude chill. The horizon was clear, too clear, as Task Force 58 steamed below, vulnerable and waiting. McCampbell and the pilots of Air Group 15 had been told the Imperial Japanese Navy's mobile carrier fleet was scattered and in retreat. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong that assessment was. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What unfolded in the next hours would not only change the course of the Pacific War, but would transform the understanding of aerial combat itself, as an American naval aviator from rural Alabama would accomplish what many military strategists had deemed mathematically impossible. The morning briefing aboard the USS Essex had been tense but optimistic. Captain Ralph Ofsty, commanding Air Group 15, outlined the day's mission with practiced precision. Intelligence suggests minimal air resistance. The Japanese carrier force is believed to be conserving aircraft following losses at Saipan. Maintain standard patrol patterns and report any sightings immediately. Lieutenant Commander McCampbell, KG-15's senior officer and a 34-year-old veteran pilot with over 1,500 flight hours, nodded thoughtfully. His weathered face, prematurely lined from squinting into Pacific skies, betrayed nothing of his private assessment. Since joining the fleet in May, McCampbell had seen enough to question the intelligence reports. The Japanese were retreating, yes, but rarely without a fight. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we prepare for the possibility of a major engagement?" he asked. His Alabama drawl softened by years at Annapolis. "The Marianas are too valuable. They won't just concede them." Ofsty smiled thinly. "Always the cautious one, David. That's why you're leading the CAP today. But remember, even their best pilots are running low on fuel and experience. This isn't 1942 anymore." 6,000 miles away in Tokyo, Admiral Sumu Toyoda was concluding a very different briefing. Operation Eigo, the Imperial Japanese Navy's counteroffensive to defend the Marianas, was entering its decisive phase. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's first mobile fleet, the largest carrier force Japan had assembled since Pearl Harbor, was sailing toward a confrontation that Toyoda believed would determine the war's outcome. Captain Toshiyuki Yokoi, commanding the elite 601st Air Group, stood at perfect attention as Toyoda emphasized the strategic importance of their mission. "The Americans believe we are weak, that our pilots lack the skill of our earlier victories. This perception is our greatest weapon," Toyoda stated flatly, his voice carrying the weight of imperial authority. Yokoi, a 29-year-old graduate of the Itajima Naval Academy with 21 confirmed kills, was among the few remaining pilots who had flown since the war's opening days. Once a boisterous squadron leader known for drinking contests in port, he had grown increasingly reserved as he watched comrades vanish from formation, replaced by wide-eyed teenagers with barely 120 flight hours. "The American pilots are technically proficient but lack fighting spirit," Yokoi assured the assembled pilots, many barely out of flight training. "They fly by textbook maneuvers. Their aircraft are heavy and predictable. Remember, 1-0 can defeat 5 Hellcats if the pilot's spirit is pure." Lieutenant Hiroshi Yamamoto, a fresh replacement with just 90 flight hours, looked up in admiration. "Is it true what they say, Captain, that American pilots are mostly farmers and cowboys who cannot truly understand the art of flight?" Yokoi allowed himself a small smile. "Cowboys cannot fly, Lieutenant. They may operate machinery, but they do not become one with their aircraft as we do. Our training is superior, our aircraft more responsive, our cause more righteous. This is why we will prevail." Back aboard the USS Essex, McCampbell climbed into his F-6F Hellcat, hull number 1. His plane captain, aviation machinists mate first class Roberto Gonzalez, completed the pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. "She's running perfect today, Commander," Gonzalez reported, patting the Hellcat's fuselage affectionately. "Fresh oil, timing spot on, and I balanced the props myself." McCampbell nodded appreciatively. The relationship between pilot and ground crew was sacred. His life depended on Gonzalez's meticulous attention to detail. "Thanks, Roberto. Let's hope for an uneventful patrol." "Actually, sir," Gonzalez hesitated, lowering his voice, "I heard from a radio man buddy that one of our search planes spotted a large formation heading our way. Could be the whole Japanese fleet." McCampbell's expression remained neutral, but he filed this information away carefully. Rumors circulated constantly aboard carriers, yet the ground crews often knew developments before the pilots did. "I'll keep my eyes open," he promised. As McCampbell's division of 4 Hellcats climbed toward their patrol altitude, he reflected on the aircraft beneath him. The F-6F Hellcat had entered service just a year earlier, but had already transformed the air war in the Pacific. Powered by a massive 2.00 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, it could reach speeds of 380 miles per hour. 6 .50 caliber machine guns gave it devastating firepower, while 212 gallons of internal fuel provided the range to engage and return. More importantly, Grumman had built the Hellcat to correct every weakness pilots had reported in its predecessor, the Wildcat. It climbed faster, turned tighter, and could take punishment that would shatter other aircraft. American industry was producing them at the astonishing rate of 500 per month. McCampbell knew that somewhere in Japan, engineers struggled to manufacture 40 Zeros in the same time frame. Captain Yokoi led his division of 6 Zeros toward the reported position of the American fleet. The A6 M50 remained a marvel of engineering. At 500 pounds fully loaded, it was nearly 4.0 pounds lighter than the Hellcat. This gave it unmatched maneuverability, allowing turns so tight that pursuing American pilots would black out from G-forces before completing the circle. But Yokoi harbored private concerns he dared not share with his younger pilots. The Zero's lightweight design meant sacrificing armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. A single burst from a Hellcat's 6 heavy machine guns could transform his aircraft into a fireball. Worse, American tactics had evolved. Gone were the days when American pilots would try to dogfight with Zeros, playing to Japanese strengths. "Remember your training," he radioed his formation. "The Americans fly in pairs. Break them apart and isolate them. The Hellcats cannot match our turning radius. Force them into a circle, then close for the kill." Lieutenant Yamamoto felt a surge of confidence. With just 3 combat missions completed, he had yet to score a kill. But Captain Yokoi's presence reassured him. The stories of Yokoi's 21 victories had spread throughout the training schools in Japan. Surely with such leadership, the divine wind would favor them today. "Captain," he radioed, unable to contain his enthusiasm, "I will prove today that Japanese spirit overcomes American machinery." Yokoi did not respond immediately. After several seconds of silence, his voice came through, oddly subdued. "Lieutenant, respect your enemy. American machinery is formidable. It is not spirit alone that wins battles." The warning confused Yamamoto. It contradicted everything his instructors had emphasized during training. Before he could consider this further, however, Yokoi's voice crackled through again, this time with urgency. "Large formation, 2 o'clock high, American Combat Air Patrol." McCampbell spotted the Japanese formation simultaneously. Despite years of experience, his pulse quickened. 16 Zeros were approaching from the southwest, climbing to intercept his 4 Hellcats. "Essex, KG-15 leader," he radioed calmly. 16 bandits bearing 225, Angels 20, climbing. Request immediate reinforcement. Without waiting for acknowledgement, he addressed his division. "Fighting 15, this is leader. We are outnumbered 4-1. Standard tactics. Stay in pairs, maintain energy. Boom and zoom. Do not attempt to dogfight." Lieutenant Junior Grade James Rigg, McCampbell's wingman, moved his Hellcat into closer formation. At 22, Rigg was the youngest in the division, but had already proven himself in 3 previous engagements. "Right with you, Skipper," he responded, his voice betraying none of the anxiety he surely felt. As the formations closed at a combined speed of nearly 600 miles per hour, McCampbell made a split-second decision that contradicted standard doctrine. Rather than waiting for reinforcements, he would lead an immediate attack to disrupt the Japanese formation before they could coordinate. "Fighting 15, follow me in. Target the leaders first," he ordered, pushing his throttle forward and angling his Hellcat into a shallow dive to build speed. The Pratt & Whitney engine roared in response, vibrating the airframe as it delivered its full 200 horsepower. Yokoi recognized the American tactics immediately. Rather than turning to engage the numerically superior Japanese formation, the Hellcats were diving through, using their superior speed and firepower to disrupt the Zero formation before pulling away to reset. "Break formation!" he commanded. "Pairs separate and climb. Do not let them dictate the engagement." But Lieutenant Yamamoto, eager to prove himself, ignored the order. He yanked his Zero into a tight turn, attempting to get behind the lead Hellcat as it screamed past. "I have the leader," he called excitedly, his Zero banking nearly vertical in a turn no American aircraft could match. What Yamamoto didn't understand, what many inexperienced Japanese pilots failed to grasp, was that McCampbell had anticipated this exact response. The Hellcat commander pulled into a vertical climb that burned airspeed but carried him above Yamamoto's turning Zero. Physics was unforgiving. The Zero could outturn the Hellcat, but the Hellcat's powerful engine could sustain climbs that would stall the lighter Japanese fighter. As Yamamoto completed his tight turn, he found his Zero's sluggish, bleeding energy. Looking up, he saw the Hellcat rolling over the top of its climb, now perfectly positioned above and behind him. In that moment, Yamamoto realized his mistake. "Captain, help!" he called, desperately trying to accelerate away, but his Zero, excellent in a turning fight, lacked the power to outrun a diving Hellcat. McCampbell lined up his shot carefully. 6 .50-caliber Browning machine guns were aligned to converge at 300 yards, exactly the distance to Yamamoto's Zero. He pressed the firing button on his control stick for a 2-second burst. Each gun fired at a rate of 750 rounds per minute, meaning 150 half-inch armor-piercing bullets streaked toward the Zero in that brief moment. 37 of those rounds found their mark. The Zero's unarmored fuel tank erupted, transforming the elegant fighter into a comet of burning aviation fuel. There was no parachute. McCampbell had no time to register the kill. 2 more Zeros had latched onto his tail, their 20mm cannons sending explosive shells past his cockpit. He slammed the Hellcat into a diving roll, trading altitude for speed that the Zeros couldn't match. At 400 miles per hour, the Hellcat's controls remained responsive, while the Zero's flight surfaces became dangerously rigid. "Rigg, break right," he called to his wingman. "2 on your tail." Lieutenant Rigg executed the maneuver perfectly, forcing his pursuers to overshoot. In the momentary advantage, he triggered his own guns, catching a Zero in a climbing turn. The Japanese aircraft shuddered under the impact, smoke pouring from its engine, before sliding into an unrecoverable dive. Captain Yokoi watched the engagement with growing concern. 2 Zeros lost in the opening minute, with no American casualties. The remaining American Hellcats had rejoined in disciplined pairs, maintaining their energy advantage by refusing to engage in prolonged turning battles. It was a stark contrast to 1942, when inexperienced American pilots had tried to dogfight with Zeros, with predictably disastrous results. "These are not cowboys," he muttered to himself. "These are professionals." The battle expanded as reinforcements arrived from both sides. 24 additional Zeros from Admiral Ozawa's carriers joined the fight, while 16 more Hellcats launched from the USS Essex and USS Hornet climbed to support McCampbell's embattled division. What followed was the largest carrier versus carrier air battle since the Battle of Midway. Across a 10-mile stretch of sky, American and Japanese naval aviators tested equipment and training in a desperate struggle for control of the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Commander McCampbell found himself in an environment few pilots ever experience, target-rich and chaotic. With practiced precision, he and Rig worked through the Japanese formations. Their tactics never varied: accelerate, climb, select a target, and dive to attack, then zoom back up to safety. It was methodical, almost mechanical, but devastatingly effective against opponents trying to force them into turning battles. By the 1-hour mark, McCampbell had personally downed 7 Zeros, an achievement that would have made him an ace twice over in a single engagement. Yet there was no time to celebrate as more Japanese aircraft arrived from carriers beyond the horizon. Captain Yokoi had survived the initial American attack through experience and discipline. 3 times he had avoided McCampbell's diving attacks by using the Zero's superior roll rate at low speeds to slip aside at the last moment, but each maneuver cost energy, and Yokoi found himself flying lower, slower, and with fewer options. Of his original division, only 2 pilots remained. Lieutenant Yamamoto and 3 others had fallen to McCampbell's guns. Another had collided with an American dive bomber that blundered into the dogfight. The last had simply disappeared during a cloud transit, perhaps succumbing to battle damage or spatial disorientation. As Yokoi climbed to rejoin the battle, he spotted a lone Hellcat pursuing a damaged Zero. The American pilot was fixated on his target, unaware of Yokoi's approach from below and behind, a perfect ambush position. Yokoi carefully lined up his shot, finger tensing on the trigger of his 20mm cannon. Then he hesitated. Something about the Hellcat's markings caught his attention. The number 1 on its fuselage identified it as the aircraft that had cut through his formation earlier. McCampbell's Hellcat. A cold calculation formed in Yokoi's mind. This pilot wasn't just skilled, he was exceptional. In 40 minutes, he had destroyed more Japanese aircraft than most American pilots achieved in their entire tours. If Yokoi could eliminate him, it might change the battle's momentum. Holding position 300 yards behind and below McCampbell's Hellcat, Yokoi waited for the American to complete his attack on the damaged Zero. As expected, after scoring his 8th kill of the day, McCampbell pulled into a climbing turn to reset his altitude advantage, momentarily presenting his vulnerable underside to Yokoi's guns. Yokoi fired a sustained burst, his 20mm cannon shells arcing toward the Hellcat. Several struck the American fighter's wing and fuselage, tearing holes in the aluminum skin. But unlike the Zero, the Hellcat was built to absorb punishment. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fires, while armor plating protected vital systems and the pilot. McCampbell felt the impacts hammer through his aircraft. Warning lights flashed across his instrument panel as hydraulic pressure dropped and his right aileron control slackened. Adrenaline surged through his system as he slammed the stick forward, diving away from the attack while searching frantically for his assailant. "Rig, I'm hit! Bandit on my 6!" he called, struggling to maintain control of his damaged Hellcat. Lieutenant Rig, who had been climbing to rejoin after his own engagement, spotted Yokoi's Zero pursuing McCampbell's diving Hellcat. Without hesitation, he pushed his aircraft into a steep dive, exceeding 450 miles per hour as he closed the distance. Yokoi, focused on delivering a killing blow to McCampbell, failed to notice Rig's approach until a stream of .50 caliber rounds shattered his canopy. The Zero with no armor to protect its control systems, immediately lost elevator authority. Yokoi found himself in an unrecoverable dive, the blue Pacific expanding to fill his shattered windscreen. With practiced movements, he released his harness and pushed himself clear of the doomed aircraft. The slipstream caught him violently, but his parachute deployed successfully. As he drifted toward the ocean below, Yokoi watched the continuing battle with professional detachment. Already he could see the outcome. American production and training had overcome the advantage of Japanese skill and design. Quantity had a quality all its own. McCampbell, despite damage to his Hellcat, refused to withdraw from the battle. Working around his aircraft's limitations, the sluggish right aileron and fluctuating hydraulic pressure, he continued to engage the dwindling Japanese formations. By early afternoon, the skies over the Philippine Sea belonged to the Americans. Admiral Ozawa's carrier force had committed 373 aircraft to the battle. Only 130 would return. Among the losses were most of Japan's remaining experienced pilots, irreplaceable assets in a war increasingly defined by America's industrial and training advantages. When McCampbell finally landed his damaged Hellcat on the USS Essex's flight deck, he had achieved what many considered impossible. In a single day of combat, he had personally destroyed 9 Japanese aircraft confirmed, with 3 more probable kills. Combined with his wingman rig's 4 victories, their 2-plane element had accounted for 16 enemy aircraft, the equivalent of an entire Japanese carrier air group. As ground crews swarmed his aircraft, McCampbell remained in the cockpit for several minutes, hands shaking with the adrenaline crash that followed combat. When he finally climbed down, Captain Ofsty was waiting. "I underestimated them," Ofsty admitted, surveying the hundreds of bullet holes perforating McCampbell's Hellcat. "Intelligence said they were sending inexperienced pilots." McCampbell shook his head. "Some were green, sir, but their leaders knew what they were doing. That last 0 nearly had me." In the debriefing that followed, naval intelligence officers reconstructed the battle that would soon be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American pilots had shot down over 300 Japanese aircraft while losing only 30 of their own, a kill ratio of 10-1. McCampbell's personal tally would expand to 19 confirmed kills across multiple engagements over the next 3 months, making him the Navy's highest-scoring ace. Lieutenant Rigg, still buzzing with excitement, clapped McCampbell on the shoulder as they left the debriefing. "Not bad for a cowboy from Alabama, eh, Skipper?" McCampbell smiled tiredly. "Is that what they call us?" "According to a 0 pilot we fished out of the drink this morning, said their instructors told them Americans were just cowboys who couldn't really fly." Rigg laughed. "Bet he's reconsidering that assessment." 6 months later, Captain Toshiyuki Yokoi sat in a prisoner-of-war camp in Pearl Harbor, being interviewed by U.S. Naval Intelligence. Having survived 3 days floating in the Philippine Sea before rescue by an American destroyer, he now provided insights into Japanese training and tactics with the stoic professionalism of a career officer. Lieutenant Commander Owen Richardson, the intelligence officer conducting the interview, pushed a photograph across the table. "Do you recognize this pilot?" Yokoi studied the image. A weathered American in his mid-30s, standing beside a Hellcat marked with the number 1 on its fuselage. 9 rising sun flags were painted beneath the cockpit, with space clearly left for more. "Yes," Yokoi nodded. "He shot down Lieutenant Yamamoto and 3 others from my division on June 19th. His aircraft was very distinctive. He attacked head-on, never turned with us." Richardson nodded. "That's Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell. He ended the war with 34 confirmed kills, making him the highest-scoring Navy ace. He's being awarded the Medal of Honor next month." Yokoi wasn't surprised. He had recognized exceptional skill that day over the Philippine Sea. What did surprise him was Richardson's next question. What made your pilots believe Americans couldn't fly well? Our intelligence suggests Japanese aviators were told American pilots were mostly farmers and cowboys who lacked proper training. Yokoi considered his answer carefully. In 1941 and 1942, this was somewhat true. Your pilots fought bravely, but made tactical errors, trying to turn with our Zeros, flying predictable patterns. We believed this reflected something inherent in American character, that you could operate machines but not master them as we did. He gestured to the photograph of McCampbell. By 1944, this had changed completely. Your pilots like this one fought differently. They used their aircraft's strengths, avoided its weaknesses, and flew with discipline we could no longer match. We still told new pilots that Americans were cowboys who couldn't fly, but the veterans knew better. Richardson made notes before asking, "What changed in your assessment?" "Everything," Yokoi replied simply. "Your training improved while ours declined. Your aircraft improved while we used the same designs. You replaced losses while we could not. But most importantly, you learned from mistakes while our command refused to acknowledge them." After the war, David McCampbell rarely spoke about his experiences. When pressed by family or admirers, he would typically deflect with humor or change the subject. On the rare occasions when he did discuss his record-setting achievements, he emphasized the same points: systematic training, technical advantages, and teamwork. "I wasn't the best pilot in the Navy," he would insist. "I just had the best ground crew, the best wingman, and the best aircraft for the job." The Japanese had incredible pilots, some of the best natural aviators I've ever seen, but we had Pratt & Whitney engines, armor plating, and a training program that produced thousands of competent pilots instead of hundreds of exceptional ones. In 1996, 5 decades after the war, McCampbell attended a reunion of Pacific War aviators in San Diego. Among the attendees was an elderly Japanese man who approached McCampbell during the reception, bowing slightly. "Commander McCampbell," the man said in accented English, "I am Hiroki Yokoi, son of Captain Toshiyuki Yokoi of the 601st Air Group. My father wished me to give you this if I ever had the opportunity to meet you." He handed McCampbell a small package wrapped in rice paper. Inside was a faded photograph of a young Japanese pilot standing beside a Zero fighter, along with a brief note. The note read simply, "To the American pilot who taught me that cowboys can indeed fly, with respect from an old opponent. Captain Toshiyuki Yokoi, Imperial Japanese Navy, retired." McCampbell studied the photograph for several long moments before carefully rewrapping it. "Your father was an exceptional pilot," he told Hiroki Yokoi. "He nearly got me that day over the Philippine Sea. Another few seconds and our places might have been reversed." The Japanese man smiled sadly. "My father said much the same about you. He told me the future of aviation was visible that day, not in the dogfighting tactics of the past, but in American mass production and systematic training. He said by 1944, Japan was sending up spirited amateurs against American professionals." McCampbell nodded thoughtfully. "We were all amateurs when the war started. The difference was that America had the luxury of learning from mistakes. We could lose battles without losing the war. Japan never had that margin for error. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot marked a definitive turning point in the air war over the Pacific. Before this engagement, Japanese naval aviation remained a credible threat to American carrier operations. Afterward, Japan's naval air arm existed largely on paper, lacking the trained pilots, fuel, and aircraft to challenge American control of the skies. The battle underscored how completely the balance had shifted since 1942. In early war engagements, a skilled Zero pilot could indeed defeat multiple American opponents through superior aircraft performance and training. By mid-1944, American industrial capacity was producing 21 0 aircraft per month, compared to Japan's 500. More importantly, the United States had established a training pipeline that produced 10 2,000 qualified naval aviators annually, each with twice the flight hours of their Japanese counterparts. Statistics tell part of the story. The F-6F Hellcat ended the war with a 19-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft, the highest of any fighter in the U.S. arsenal. Of 275 Hellcats produced, only 270 were lost in aerial combat, a testament to their durability and effectiveness. Meanwhile, nearly 11 Zhao Zeros were produced, with over 500 destroyed in combat. But numbers alone don't capture the human dimension of this technological and training disparity. For pilots like David McCampbell and Toshiyuki Yokoi, the air war was experienced as a series of split-second decisions, each potentially fatal. American pilots increasingly made these decisions from a position of material advantage. Better aircraft, more ammunition, superior intelligence, and the certainty of rescue if shot down over friendly waters. Their Japanese counterparts faced grimmer calculations. Limited fuel-restricting maneuver options, dwindling ammunition supplies, and the near certainty that a bailout meant either drowning or captivity. By late 1944, many experienced Japanese pilots were instructor qualified but remained in combat units due to desperate shortages, while American aces were regularly rotated home to train the next generation. The psychological impact was profound. American pilots attacked with growing confidence, while Japanese aviators increasingly flew defensive missions with the knowledge that their sacrifices would likely not change the war's outcome. McCampbell's extraordinary achievement, 19 Zeros shot down by a pilot mockingly dismissed as a cowboy, symbolized this reversal. The farmer's son from Alabama, systematically trained and equipped with a superior aircraft, had outperformed opponents who once dominated the skies through natural skill and fighting spirit. In this transformation lay a broader lesson about modern warfare. Industrial capacity and systematic training would ultimately triumph over individual brilliance and tactical innovation. It was a lesson the United States would remember and apply in conflicts for decades to come, while Japan would rebuild its post-war aviation industry on principles of technical excellence and rigorous standardization rather than the samurai traditions that had initially inspired its naval aviators. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.